Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, and I'm coming to you with the first in a series of Writing as Activism conversations. This series was born out of a desire to participate in the Pa Gya Literary Festival, which is a writing festival that takes place in Accra, Ghana. It is a partnership between the Writers Project Ghana and several other partners, including the Goethe Institute, where the event was held. And this was the 8th edition. So I finally, after a few years of attending and meeting all kinds of wonderful writers and thinkers in the literary space, I finally found the place where my work would be a synergy with the festival, and that is Writing as Activism. The panel that I hosted is subtitled Ghanaian Voices and Pan-African Perspectives Across Genres. And so I'm happy to introduce this episode, which is that session, which took place on October 20th in Accra. You can watch the live version. There's going to be a link in the show notes at Writers Project Ghana TV on YouTube. And so get ready for a series of conversations with writers speaking about writing as activism.
Earlier this year, I launched a Solutionscape and Stretch Salon series, and the focus of that was the future of work. Ultimately, the idea is around engaging with a wider audience of prospective doers. This session is an extension of that vision. So for each of those Solutionscape and Stretch sessions, we start off with a little bit of a stretch. So what I want to do first, if you all will indulge me just a little bit, you don't have to stand up, but just to really just ground the space so that we're all together, is just to take a couple of deep breaths, sit up, straight back, all that good stuff. Just deep breath in and exhale. Again, in. Last one, let's get our arms into it. Arms up to the sky, wave your fingers, do a little shake, and exhale. All right. Are we ready? Do we feel stretched? Do we feel ready? Okay. So I think that we can all agree that writing in itself is an act of activism. That intention of writing words that will eventually see the world and be shared with others is really taking a foot forward and putting yourself in a way of action. So I want to give a shout out to all of the writers that are here this weekend, because in the fact that you've taken up a pen and put it to paper and shared it with the world, you are an activist. So cheers to the writers of the festival. Thank you for that. And so this conversation in particular will be exploring how different genres catalyze activist thoughts and actions that influence real world change. So joining us in conversation from the US, we have author, editor, critic, musician, and poet laureate of Jamaica, Ghana's very own Kwame Dawes. From the UK, we have Black feminist artist, researcher, and curator, Nadia A. Swaby. And here on stage, we have another Ghana's own, a TV and film writer, director, and producer, Nicole Amatefeo. To get us started, I've asked each of the panelists to share a reading and then give us thoughts on what was the activist inspiration around that reading. And so we'll start off with you, Kwame. Can you share your reading and tell us a little bit about the activist inspiration around your work?
Sure. What I thought I would say first is, I think the idea of activism has to be contextualized within the landscape in which we exist and the world in which we live. So the mere articulation of voice is not necessarily an activist thing if it's not acting against or towards some condition and some circumstance in the world. And so in many ways, but there's a certain kind of truth to the fact that when African voices or voices that have been for years marginalized and silent, when they articulate, when writers write, when artists make work, they are working into a vacuum, an emptiness that has existed. And that has existed not because of their own actions, but because of the actions of colonial and imperialist systems. In a sense, then, that mere articulation in the way that Audre Lorde talks about it is an act of activism. It's an act of articulating one's presence in the world, and a presence that systematically has been erased. Its value and its importance. So this is the piece that I thought I would do so that we can talk about it. It's an old piece, but it's called Fat Man, Little Boy. What are these so withered and wild in their attire? Streetcar, catch a fire, passengers, glowing like coal. And who are these come wailing this way like zombies, arms stretched out, skin melting from their bones? These are my enemies with worms in their eyes. These are my enemies with worms in their eyes. Don't you know that I am Fat Man? You could be my little boy. Since August 1945, I've ruled the sky, turned day into night. See me, big fat man. I want you to be my little boy. Count not the casualties of war. Count the fronts that again, women and children are soldier factories. Eliminate them. I am become death, the slaughterer of world. Hawk-eyed and swift, I swoop down and plunder. Obey me and play rock and roll, or you will be my enemies with worms in your eye. You'll be my enemies with worms in your eye. Don't you know that I am Fat Man? And you could be my little boy. We could rule the nations hand in hand. Market Jesus and baseball caps together hand in hand. Don't you know that I am Fat Man? I want you to be my little boy. There it is. And these, of course, come. We recognize Fat Man and Little Boy. It's a talk about war. It's in the voice of the megalomania, the one who destroys world. But it's so current today when we think about it. Count not the casualties of war, count the fronts that again, women and children are soldier factories. Eliminate them. This seems to be the attitude that exists in the Middle East right now, in the ways in which people are enacting abuse on oppressed people. So, Fat Man, Little Boy.
Thank you. Thank you. And Nadia, can you share a piece from your most current work?
Yes. Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be a part of this panel. Thank you for the invitation, Florence. And thank you for the work that you just shared, Mr. Dawes. I wanted to, before I read this little bit that I thought that I would share, I wanted to actually do a similar thing where I sort of contextualize the work that I do in general and the way in which I read the writing of this work as a kind of activist intention. And then I will read just a little bit from the introduction of the book just to kind of set up my thinking in it. So essentially, this is going to be an excerpt from a book that I've written that is about a Pan-African feminist named Amy Ashwood Garvey. It is a book that is scheduled to publish on October 25th. And so it's, very much a book that I've been working on for quite some time and finally have the privilege of being able to publish it and share it. And it is a book that is inspired by my own personal engagement with the history of Black women's movement and particularly with Black women's involvement in the Garvey movement. And when I first learned about Amy Ashwood Garvey and learned about her life, I recognized that she was missing from a lot of Black radical archives. So the research itself and the book is driven by an intention to insert Black women within these particular Pan-African and Black radical histories. But in this case, in particular, to use Amy Ashwood Garvey's archive in her life and the fact that she was missing from certain archival records as a way of both thinking about the importance of archiving and documenting Black women's lives. So I see the book itself as a book that is activist in its intention in terms of sharing Amy Ashwood Garvey's life, but also it is about an important woman who herself was an important Pan-African activist. So I'm just going to read a bit from the introduction and then I'm happy to answer more questions about it thereafter. So the book is called Amy Ashwood Garvey and the Future of Black Feminist Archives. And this is from a section called Archival Assemblages. On New Year's Day, 1969, Amy Ashwood Garvey wrote to her close friend and confidant, Lionel M. Yard, with a confession. I would hate to write my story fully, she said, in a typewritten letter posted from her home in Kingston, Jamaica, to her dear brother in Brooklyn, New York. I would have to live it over again, and it's very painful for me. I would like to get off that subject and get on to something new. Ashwood Garvey describes feeling very anxious about the biography of her life that Yard had encouraged her to write because she was hesitant to recount her relationship with Marcus Garvey, her former husband, and his second wife, her former friend, Amy Gya. I do not want to destroy Marcus's image, but the more I think of it, the more I realize that I must somehow defend myself, for it will pass into history if I do not make special mention of his behavior. Despite these concerns, Ashwood Garvey believes that her story should be told, and she needed the money from the sale of the book, so she proposed a solution. Darling, can you write it? You know everything, darling. Is it too much to ask? I'd ask only that you keep it dark. Along with the letter, Ashwood Garvey enclosed a portrait of herself and a memento from her personal archive. In the postscript, she explained to Yard, please try to take a few pictures of my very last picture taken in Africa. I would like to have it back. I can't get another. Amy Ashwood Darby passed away a few months later after an extended period of illness compounded by her financial situation. In the same letter to Yard, she explains, "My rent, etc. is due on the 6th, and I'm so forlorn the thing is enough to drive me barmy. If I could get an advance on the book, it would help me to establish a guest house and I could live and be able to do something constructive." Due to her declining physical health, which naturally affected her mental health, Amy Ashwood Darby never managed to establish a guest house in Kingston, let alone finish her story. In Yard's biography of her life, which will later develop from the pages she managed to send to Lionel Yard, he remarks that Amy's writing had become disjointed because several traumatic episodes affected her concentration, and the only thing she could commit to paper were brief, fragmentary episodes of a few pleasant moments that filtered and suffused her thoughts. This book uses Amy Ashwood Darby's archive to reflect on the future of Black feminist archives and archival practice. It is a biographical and methodological project that examines the curation of archives as a way of knowing Amy Ashwood Darby's life while attending to gaps in her archive through historical research, autoethnography, speculative narrative, and arts-based research methods. Archives here refers to manuscripts, images, and objects that I have used to create a written and visual narrative of Amy Ashwood Darby's life. This archive is comprised of Ashwood Darby's writing, typed and handwritten letters, photographs, newspaper clipping, sound, and moving images recordings, collected from conventional archival spaces and private digital collection. 2 biographies are also a part of this archive, one by Lionel Yard, Amy Ashwood Darby's good friend, and another by Darby historian Tony Martin. And they both traveled to places where Amy Ashwood Darby lived and interviewed her political allies and friends. I engaged this archive in order to demonstrate how Black feminist knowledges can be produced in the interaction between using archives for research, curatorial, and artistic purposes. Amy Ashwood Darby's life and activism are the subject of this book, but I also want readers to know her in the same way I have come to know her after more of a decade of working with her archive. And I want to show how the material it comprises might tell us everything we need to know in order to know Amy. And then I'll just read one more little section that's just a bit of a biography of her, and then I'll stop there. Known affectionately as Darty by her adopted daughters, Auntie Amy by the African and Caribbean students she supported and befriended, and Bohema by her Ghanaian allies and friends, Amy Ashwood Darby was a well-respected Pan-Africanist, feminist, activist, orator, playwright, publisher, restaurant owner, author, art collector, sociologist, and a social worker. An early Black internationalist throughout her life, Amy Ashwood Darby moved between cities in South America, North America, West Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean. She was born in Jamaica. She spent her early childhood in Panama, later migrating to the U.S. and the UK. She had a home in London, family in Kingston, an office in Harlem, and land in the Ashanti region. Each of these experiences and migrations shaped her identity and consciousness as a Black woman of the African diaspora. She launched numerous projects supporting Black women's social and economic development, wrote essays and books about Black and African histories and cultures, and gave lectures on women's roles in anti-colonial and Black empowerment movements. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'll just stop there and say that it's just my intention to try to draw forward all of the different ways in which she was a central part of these different Black feminist and Pan-African moments. And so the book itself is both weaving together her archive, but also connecting the different spaces in which her history can be located. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Next up, we have a clip. I think the better way of illustrating screenwriting is to see it in action. And so we have a clip from season 1 of An African City that Nicole will share a little bit. Do you want to prep it at all or just, okay. Okay.
In journalism school, I once heard a quote from an American journalist and author, Hunter Stockton Thompson. He said, "Sex without love is as hollow and ridiculous as love without sex." According to my friend Sade, sex was just fine without love. According to my friend Ngozi, love was just fine without sex. For Makina, she was about to figure out the difference.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to Thank you. So, guess who's coming to town in 2 weeks?
Oh. The African American lawyer who lives in London?
Yeah. Nice. His firm is handling some legal transactions at Jubilee Oil Fields. In fact, I think he has a meeting with your father. Oh, Pinoto's Oil. Yeah, I think I saw it in my dad's schedule. Well, he gets here next week, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. Oh, finally.
Finally what?
Oh, we've been having this flirtatious thing for like 3 years now, but we've never slept together.
Why not? What, Ngozi convinced you of abstinence and celibacy. You're Team Ngozi?
Oh no, I'm Team Sade. But every single time I've been in London, or the couple of times that he's been here in Accra, I've always been on my period.
Seriously? Every single time?
Every single time.
Well, what about this time?
Well, no, not this time.
Okay, cool.
Great. I think. What's today's date?
The 17th. Oh, by the way, I have tree lessons tomorrow morning. You want to come with me again?
No.
No, you don't want to come with me to tree? Really?
No. What? Menstrual cycle. Thanks.
Are you serious?
Oh, Stefan.
And while Makina spent the morning at war with her menstrual cycle, later that night, Sade, Ngozi, and Zainab were about to go to war with their dates.
Are looking beautiful tonight.
Thank you.
And we are three lucky men.
That you are. Waiter, can I have another glass of wine, please? Actually, Mapacho, just bring the whole bottle.
This is the last time I let Ngozi set us up.
I believe I've seen you before. At Parliament.
Oh, yeah, I'm there once in a while, trying to get support from some of your trade colleagues, actually.
Zainab is responsible for trading shea butter from Burkina Faso to Ghana and many parts of the world.
Ah, very good.
Great. Waiter, quickly.
Yes, you were last week for the trade committee meeting.
Yeah, she made a presentation to the entire panel.
Are you in the shea butter industry as well?
No, I'm not.
So, Zainab, what was the presentation on?
HIV/AIDS, getting tested, using condoms. The trade groups that I work with in the north, about 300 women cooperatives, they get tested regularly.
You use condoms?
Ben, you can't say that. That's rude.
Well, yes, I do.
Why? I mean, you look clean.
I look clean.
You guys look too clean to have HIV. Why bother with condoms? Especially when it's love.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that there was a clean look.
Of course. Look, you see that lady by the bar? Now, she doesn't look clean. I mean, she could have HIV. But you ladies, you look clean. Look, we only sleep with girls who look clean.
Guys, can we change the subject?
Aren't the three of you on the Parliamentary Committee for Health?
Yes.
Doesn't that mean you're responsible for the government's policies on health?
Oh, yeah. You see, there's policies and there's...
What you practice?
Guys, can we please change the subject?
Listen, it's just a compliment. You guys don't have HIV. You look too clean. What's the problem?
So, if you look clean, you can't catch a disease.
Exactly.
You have got to be kidding me. In college, I had chlamydia.
You know what? Me too. Ngozi, let's go.
Well, last week I had a yeast infection. It was from jogging. I really should be more diligent about showering after my jogs. And then I got this new detergent.
Ngozi, let's go.
Thank you. My next question is for all of my panelists. And what I'd like you to tell us about is, what are your thoughts on the how in terms of tools and techniques that you use or have used in your writing to inspire activism? And so since we've just seen Nicole's segment, let's start with Nicole.
I mean, the how was 10 years I came out with the web series An African City, which CNN and BBC dubbed as Africa's answer to Sex in the City. And 10 years ago, I decided to use the tool YouTube. Mm-hmm. Before, let's say 15 years ago, if I had a TV idea, I had to get a TV executive to agree, and it would go through this whole process. But with YouTube, I was fully in control to tell the story I wanted to tell. So we told, season 1, 10 episodes, season 2, 13 episodes, but that particular episode, born out of truth. And it was a story I really wanted to tell.
Let's go in reverse order. Since we have Nadia on the screen, can you tell us about the tools and techniques that you use in the how of your writing for activism?
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think in first instance, it's about a kind of critical engagement with archives while also trying to create new knowledges at the same time. So a part of the work is attempting to shed light on what exists in the kind of archival collection of an important Pan-African feminist like Amy Ashford Garvey, who would have never completed writing a biography of her life for a variety of reasons, but has material that can be brought together to tell a story about her life that's dispersed in many different collections. So one part is my attempt to try to do that, to try to create a biography by stitching it together. But I'm also trying to ask questions about the way in which we tell those stories as, in my case, and thinking about as a kind of Black feminist method, and the way in which a lot of the archives that we might use to tell the story about someone like her are written from the perspective of other people's interpretation of her life. Or, for example, in one significant collection of Amy Ashford Garvey's, it's documentation of her travels by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And what does it mean, which is a kind of, a policing state in the United States. And what does it mean to, as a Black feminist, to engage with that material, or rather to refuse to engage with that material, and instead to try to create a narrative that is based on a way in which I think that she would want to be remembered, which is on her own terms. So part of that work has been to create biographies about her life through conversation with other people who know about her legacy, but also by attempting to visit the places that she lived and called home. So one of the things I did in the book was spent some time in Kumasi, where Amy Ashford Garvey lived, and did a kind of diasporic return. She had learned of her sort of African heritage as a child in Jamaica, and her great-grandmother had told her that she was had been from the Ashanti region. And so she had told herself for the rest of her life that she would make an intention of visiting to that area. And so she spent some time there. She, lived with Prebe II for a period of time. And so one part of the book was trying to visit to the same regions that she spent time in, and to try to use the experience of physically being there as a way of expanding on what that experience might have been like for her. So there's a part of it that's about using the archives that exist, but also trying to interpret and imagine into the gap in her archive, if you will, where she's not written down in her own words about a particular experience, but we know from the archive that experience existed. And I think the other thing as well has been trying to use some of her visual images and some of the way in which she used photography to document her experiences in her life, both in terms of taking photographs of others, collecting photographs of family and friends, but also having photographs taken of herself. And so it's also trying to talk about the power of photographic documentation in the life of a woman like that, who would have been born at the time that photography was also being used to create and construct narratives about African and Black others. But what does it mean for her to reclaim the camera in the telling of her own story? So there are different ways in which I try to sort of explore different methods for trying to tell us more about her story, but also give her a kind of voice and agency in the writing too.
Thank you. Kwame, your thoughts?
I think that for me, the question of tools and so on is, especially because of the work I do with writers, as you know, I publish a lot of writers and I work with a lot of writers, is to ask the question whether the impulse to activism is organic to their own lives or is a coat that they put on to perform as a writer. And I try to encourage people. I mean, as a writer, I think my work has activist impact. But if I personally am not an activist, then I'm performing. If I'm writing, it's sort of an activist way. So for me, I am somebody who is committed to a Pan-Africanist vision in all my life. I'm also a person whose life has been about that. So my poetry happens to reflect my life rather than my poetry sort of being a new dimension of my life. But what poetry does is it reflects where I'm coming from. And one of the challenges that I think I see in some writers is that they are claiming a kind of positionality in their work which doesn't reflect their own lives. And that contradiction, frankly, I think makes their work weak. And so one of the things I would say is that the the poetic expression, which is the quest for beauty, for articulation, for a way to speak into the world, if it reflects one's existence and one's own struggles, one's own understanding of struggle, that work then begins to have its own power. But it's the truth of that relationship that I find most important and most valid. And I think in practice, we can see that in that little film, that little clip of that sitcom, drama. There is that conversation at the heart of it, which is the conversation about what is the nature of somebody who is living with HIV/AIDS, and whether that, what is clean and what is not clean. I think the reason we are moved by it is that it's believable that conversation actually happened to somebody, and somebody has had to contend with that. And in same with that, when we are talking about Amy Garvey and her, that beautiful letter that she writes is such a powerful articulation of her silencing and the struggles around it. And so the articulation of it is coming out of experience, and that makes it radical. And I think that makes it activist. So that's how I would address the question. Tools are tools, but it's what is coming from experience that articulates an activist position.
I just wanted to add to that. So
Sure.
Certainly that clip did come from an honest place. It came from truth. I was working at the World Bank at the time, and I went to a development conference. And afterwards, some of my girlfriends and I were in conversations with members of parliament who were talking like this. So most of An African City is written from a place of truth. That's one of the tools and one of the techniques. But the show itself is a form of activism.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the 5 women who are part of the cast, they range in complexions. And that's because growing up, most of the times when I saw Black women on screen, Black women who were being praised, they turned out they were Black, they were light-skinned Black women. And so I grew up knowing that one day I wanted to see on screen dark-skinned women being praised for how beautiful they are as well. So the show itself, in terms of the casting, is a tool of activism in that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much I could say, but I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you for that.
I can say though that I've watched all the episodes of that show.
Me too.
I'm glad it's back. I mean, I'm glad you're doing more work on it, because it is, for that reason, it's actually seeing Black bodies moving through space is quite powerful, I think. And for many of us, it's necessary as a kind of antidote to notions of beauty, notions of identity, and so on. So congrats on pushing it through and making that work happen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this question is for you as well, Kwame. Being the Poet Laureate of Jamaica, I think that many of us might know what the Poet Laureate role is, but can you give us a little bit more background on that tradition and how you are kind of embodying it or making it your own as the current Poet Laureate?
Jamaica has had Poet Laureates in the past. In other words, the last Poet Laureate who had a lifetime status was a man called Tom Redcombe, and he had that position until about 1930 or 1940. After that, there was no Poet Laureate in Jamaica. And so this new Poet Laureate role has emerged in the early part of this century. And we've had, I'm the 4th Poet Laureate with 3-year terms. The simple goal is to be the advocate and the articulator and the celebrator of poetry, and to celebrate what the poetic tradition has been in Jamaica, and to function also as a spokesperson for the culture and the work that has been done. My goal is to do a lot of the archival work, which is to retrieve a lot of the work that has been written by Jamaicans, but that has not been collected or made available. My goal is also to encourage more writing. And this is work that I've been doing for many years in Jamaica with the Calabash Literary Festival and so on. But we want to do more of that work and to heighten the writing. And then I think above all, I want Jamaicans to engage with the notion, because Jamaicans fundamentally, in terms of the articulation on the everyday life, are profoundly poetic. I just don't think they know they're poetic in the way that I'm saying it. But one of the things is to celebrate the Jamaican talk and so on in the way that it does. And hopefully the work that I would do is to try, because one of the things we see in Africa, for instance, is that there are not many countries that have Poet Laureate. We have one in South Africa and in other places. And it's to try and create a dialogue with African nations about establishing a Poet Laureate, somebody who will be an advocate and a celebrator of poetry in the country. So I have a long list of things that I hope to do, but that's just the start. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So this question is for Nadia, and it is about activism in you. And so we got a little bit of background from both Nicole and Kwame about, their sparks. And I want to ask you, in terms of Black feminism, that is activism in itself, as we mostly understand it. So how did you come to that approach, and what was the spark that led you to that activism and that calling yourself a Black feminist?
That is a question that would probably vary depending on the place, time, context in which you asked me that, because I think there's multiple genealogies or multiple paths to any kind of Black feminist genealogy. Maybe I'll answer that question, maybe more focused in writing and thinking with Amy Ashwood Garvey, potentially. I think that might be one way to gather thoughts. I would say that in one of the things that I try to explore in my work on Amy Ashwood Garvey and in this book and in different snapshots, that kind of ethnographic vignettes or autoethnographic vignettes that appear throughout the text, is to thinking about the way in which doing research into her life and activism and traveling to the different places that she lived and called home and did important activist work, and having to study those archives and learn about different histories, how my own subjectivity and understanding of myself as a Black woman of Jamaican parentage, the descendant of enslaved Africans, as the kind of Black diasporic subject evolved as a result of doing this research with her archive. And that there isn't, for me, there isn't a thing where I have written about Amy Ashwood Garvey. There's a kind of co-writing, there's a kind of co-story that is happening where both myself as the writer and the thinker and engager with Amy's archive it's taken me to new places and had new encounters, so that my own sense of myself has evolved as a result. So the very fact that I now live in the UK and that I do the PhD and the work that I wound up doing and being in the context that I live in now is because of my work on Amy Ashwood Garvey. When I was a master's student, I was working on her at a university in New York. I got the opportunity to take funding and go to the UK to do research on Amy Ashwood Garvey's archive and the kind of activism she did in the UK. And while I was in the UK, I connected with an important Pan-African intellectual named Hakeem Adi. And I was talking to him about my work and the way in which I want my understanding of the work that I do to be diasporic. I kept trying to say that, I wanted to not just be about being a Black Jamaican in the United States, but thinking about the same way that, though I grew up in the US, I also grew up with these idioms of Britishness because of the fact that I was a person of Jamaican heritage. And so the understanding of myself was already existed outside of the nation state. And so I was interested in thinking about Amy Ashwood Garvey in that way. This is what I was expressing to him. And he was like, well, then you should come to London, because there is no place that is diasporic in the way that where people of the different Black diaspora in the way that London is. And so I pursued doing a PhD in London because that got me thinking about the way in which my life could be expanded. And so the way in which my thinking could be expanded by living in a place like that. So in many ways, I think there's a kind of entanglement between the thinking and the writing and the studying Amy Ashwood Garvey and the path that it sent me on in my own life. Because then I wound up moving to the UK and working side by side in political organizations with women from West Africa, with women from South Africa, with women from East Africa that I had never even would have encountered in the same way in the kind of Black political organizing spaces I was in the US. And so I think for me, an important thing is that Black feminist research and being a scholar is an important part of the evolution of myself and my own journey and experience. And it's taken me to new kind of intellectual and creative and political spaces. So it would be difficult to name it as one moment, but rather to say the multiple different moments that kind of happen and that shape the way in which I think and locate my kind of self. I actually would tend to say that I'm a Black diaspora feminist rather than just a Black feminist, as a way of intentionally marking the kind of diasporic histories and journeys that shape my understanding of what Black feminism is and does. And it's very fundamentally Pan-Africanist. It's Black internationalist. It's something that cannot be confined within one particular genealogy, but the different histories that bring us together as people of Africa and the diaspora.
Okay.
She's helped me find a new identity. Thanks for that. I'm now also going to call myself a Black diaspora feminist.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So speaking of your feminism and your diaspora feminism, so this question is for you, Nicole. So 10 years later, a number of the social issues that you tackled in season 1 are still very prominent issues that we're dealing with here in Ghana. So alongside voices like yours, what do you think it will take to move people and policy to solutions? Or what are some of those glimmers of hope that you have kind of seen over time that make you feel hopeful?
Well, actually, let me take it back. When I wrote this show, I was in my mid-20s. When I first started writing in African City, I was in my mid-20s. And again, I was working for the World Bank and I was in Washington, D.C. And a lot of times when these issues would come up, I would look at who was in the room. So if we were discussing maternal mortality in Uganda and Ghana, I only saw white middle-aged men in the room. And so I knew that that was a problem. And then even when I moved to Ghana, again, I was in my mid-20s and I was obsessed with Good Morning Ghana. I'm not sure if it's still going on, but I was obsessed with watching Good Morning Ghana. Again, every morning they would get up, discuss policy issues. But when I looked at who was talking, again, if it was a maternal issue, it was men on my screen. And so, I did the show because I really wanted to see the conversation happen with issues on the continent. I wanted it to happen among the youth on the continent. I wanted it to happen if it was on women issues, Black women issues. I wanted it to be with us. And that's one of the reasons I created the show, so the conversation could be with us. Has much changed? I don't think so, because I think we play politics with our policies. But I do know that as a citizen, I did not just want to criticize. I wanted to be in conversation with my peers so that we could at least think about what the solutions could be.
Okay. And just kind of following up on that, thinking about the who was in the room. Okay. So when you were writing it and thinking about, okay, I'm going to get this on the screen somehow, some way, first you did it yourself. How did you balance, or how do you balance commercial appeal with social impacts?
Yeah. So for me, it's edutainment. Is that what it's called? I just love balancing what's educational with what's entertaining. So again, working with the World Bank, if I did a YouTube video talking about AIDS, I would struggle to get clicks and views. Mm-hmm. But once I mixed that in with 5 beautiful women wearing beautiful clothes, 1 or 2 curse words here or there.
A lot of sex.
The show took off and the conversation was there. So yeah, I think it's important to find a way to balance the two, what is educational and what's entertaining, and just marry the two.
So once you were in studio, like working with a major studio, did you see that conversation had to change at all? Or, what kind of policing potentially was part of that story?
Yeah, I guess that's what's kind of changed with TV. So recently when I wrote when I was part of the writing team for The Best Man, the studio executives encouraged us to kind of tackle issues and take it there. Yeah, we were encouraged to do so. And I think the audience appreciated that.
Okay, nice. So I'm going to go back to Kwame for this question. And it's about genres, because we're going back to genres. So across the many genres that you apply your craft, because you're a musician, a poet, a critic, which do you think speaks the loudest in terms of social movement, and why?
It's a tricky one. I think the obvious thing, we know that in the global space, the film, television, these things garner the greatest amount of attention. I've worked with screenplay. We did a beautiful film called Moon Over Aburi with Anua Boachie, who directed and did some work, a lot of it. She was lead actress in it and so on. And that has done a lot of festival rounds. And it was based on a short story that I wrote, which centers around the women's voices. So in many ways, if that picks up, if films pick up and so on, they get a lot of traction and attention. But as a writer and as a writer of poetry and so on, which doesn't necessarily gain that kind of attention, but yet I get into positions in which I have opportunity to speak and to articulate the work that I'm doing. At the end of the day, I think artists must find what their niches, what their skills are, and where they're located, and then articulate their own heart and spirit within those spaces. I think that if we continue to give them the space to do that and encourage them to do that, there's going to be a cumulative sense of an understanding and of beauty, so that if I'm watching a television series that is, supposedly entertaining, I still cannot turn off my critical sense of how am I being portrayed, how are our bodies being portrayed. I have to ask that question. And in a sense, this is the work that having Black bodies inside those studios, having Black bodies inside those radio stations or doing the podcast is necessary, because of course we are thinking in a way that opens up the possibilities for articulating a certain truth of experience. So for me, in all the genres that I work in, that consciousness of the person I am, I do not leave it behind. And I think that is massively important.
Okay, thank you. So we're getting close on time, and I just have one more question, then I'll open it up for a few questions from the audience. And so the question for all of you in a quick round robin type of way is, if you could put together the essential Pan-African reading or watching list, what would be some of the reads, titles, or watches that you would add to that list? And that's for everyone. A Pan-African activism reading or watching list.
Mine would range from everything. So I'm Ghanaian, but I'm very sorry to say that the first time I ever read a book by Kwame Nkrumah wasn't until I was in college. I had no idea the first president of my country had written all these books. And so definitely books by Kwame Nkrumah. But then more recently, a book by Demilare, Nearly All the Men in Lagos Are Mad. So yeah, that spectrum.
Okay.
Nearly All the Men in Lagos Are Mad. It was a great book.
Okay.
12 chapters of just hilarity.
Nadia?
For me, I mean, there are lots of different things that I could reference, but I thought given that I've just written a kind of biography of an important Black, Pan-African figure, one who was a woman, I thought maybe I would suggest 3 that were really important for my thinking and writing. One is called Left of Karl Marx, The Political Life of Claudia Jones. That's by Carol Boyce Davies. Just a really important book that's about Claudia Jones locating her within histories of Pan-Africanism. Then there's Islanda, The Large and Unconventional Life of Mrs. Paul Robinson by Barbara Ransby, another important, woman figure in the history of Pan-Africanism. And then the other the biography of Marcus Garvey's second wife, is called The Veiled Garvey, The Life and Times of Amy Jacques Garvey by Eula Taylor. And I just think those are 3, really important biographical texts about woman Pan-Africanists that I would recommend and that anybody read if they're interested in that story and in that genre.
Okay. And the last of the recommendations from Dr. Dawes.
Yeah, I just had, there was a wonderful mechanical engineer PhD student in my office from Ghana in my office yesterday. And he was asking me, what should I read and so on. And I said, you're a mechanical engineer. And he said, no, I want to open my mind and so on. I said, well, go close to home. So I love this idea of reading Kwame Nkrumah. I love the idea of reading the works of a period and at a time. I recommended to him, since he was in the States and working in the States, to read a very brilliant book by a guy called David Blight about Frederick Douglass, and it's called Frederick Douglass. And you would say, well, why? And I said, well, if you read that, you begin to understand the space that you're in. I tell writers, I tell people to read close to home. One of the first things I did when I was thinking about understanding America was to read biographies of all the presidents of the United States up until 1900. This opened my eyes to all kinds of things about race and about identity and about the current state of the country. If you're a writer, if you're a poet, look at the poets who are in your community, who come out of your community, and read their work, and so that you understand how they respond as the chroniclers of the sentiment of their time and our time, so that you can be then your own chronicler of the sentiment and the sensibilities of your time. So this is how I'll do it. So somebody would ask me and think I'll give them a list of names of books but I could go through 1 million books, but it's not valuable to you unless you tailor make it for who you are and where you are in the world. And then from there, you expand your knowledge and understanding.
I would just add to that, I guess, for me in my early 40s, I had to ask myself, what was the gap in my own education? Mm-hmm. Being a Black Ghanaian woman raised in New York, mostly white neighborhoods, what was the gap? And I realized that I'd never been assigned books by Ghanaian women. I'd never been assigned by women from the African continent. So in my early 40s, I just made it a mission to spend years just reading books by women like Tai Selassie and Nana Brew Hammond. But I just had to make sure that I looked at the gap in my own education and asked myself, why was I never assigned books by Ghanaian women or African women? And then take it upon myself to do so. And now I'm doing that for my daughter.
Thank you for that. So we have a few minutes for questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello. Awesome. Thank you so much for this panel. It's very, I think, inspiring, but also grounding. And it, even though it hasn't ended in like a call to action, there's one that's very inherent in what each of you have said. So my question is, a lot of you have talked about the activism in your work, and it seems to have come from an incredible sense of self. And I think, I mean, I'm in my late 20s, but I think I still grapple with that. Like, who am I really? And like, how does that change and evolve over time? And so my question to you is, how did you do the work of discovering who you are and like what your positionality was and how you wanted that to shape how you navigated your art and activism? Thank you.
You know, I don't think I've ever struggled with who I am. And let me explain what I mean. I think we take who we are for where we are. This is really important. But there is a value in understanding ourselves as not arrived here without there being a past behind us, and therefore a future after us. That is, we come from somewhere. This is as old as any African understanding of self is. And I think it's almost cliche to think about it, but it's cliche because it's absolutely true. That if we understand where we are coming from and what has made us and who has gone before us, if you know your history, then you will know where you're coming from. You won't have to ask me, who the hell do I think I am? This is Bob Marley, right? So the understanding history and then making yourself understand yourself in the present. But the other thing I think is really important, which I love in the question, which is to say that you're wrestling with this question. And I think it's good to be wrestling with this question. It's good to be saying, who am I? But the question is then, what do I do in this space? Being who am I is cute. It's nice. But what does that mean for how I live and what I do with my life and how do I engage the world that I am? And sometimes, sadly, the world's impact on us teaches us who we are. You might think you are one thing, but the way the world deals with you tells you what armor you must wear, what tools you must have, what ways do you have to deal with that in that world. And so above all, I think honesty and a kind of truth telling seems to be at the heart of it, being truthful about ourselves and facing those, and then acting upon those. So yeah, that's how I put it.
I would add to that, anything that you grew up learning from the media, try to unlearn it and then ask yourself, why? Be like a 3-year-old and constantly ask yourself, why this, why that? Also think about some of your core wounds when it comes to identity. So one of my core wounds was I was 12 and again, the only Black girl in Westchester, New York. And I remember we were learning about the AIDS epidemic at the time. And a kid said, well, the solution to the AIDS epidemic is just to blow up Africa. And immediately I remember being so angry. But that was a sign of what I wanted to do when I grew up, right? I wanted to channel that anger in my art. I wanted to fight that single story. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Going one, going twice.
I feel like talking, guys. Come on.
If there are no other questions, I do want to acknowledge that we have one of our own poets in the audience here. Professor Kofi Anyidoho is here. Hello.
Greetings, bro. Good.
And so I'll just do a round robin from each of the panelists. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
I just wanted to say that I love that idea of finding one's gaps and then spending time to fill the gaps. I think that's brilliant and I think that's necessary. And today, what we are faced with is incredible amounts of information immediately at our fingertips. But the information is curated. The information is organized to convince us of things that we may not even realize it's doing that to us. And I think, one of the challenges that we live in, the people in this generation live in, is the social media and the way it shapes us and the way it guides us. So we think emotionally that we have connected with a war because we've seen these images, but we can turn around and start eating a burger and just move on with our lives. There's something emotionally complex and damaging about that reality, a heightened sense of connection and yet a reduced sense of connection at the same time. And that we all face it. And I do think that disciplining ourselves around the information we take in and expanding our information beyond what is curated for us in social media and so on, I just think it's going to be increasingly important and valuable. So books that are happening, books like this wonderful book on Amy, the second Amy Garvey, books that go deeper, that go further, films that go deeper and that go further, and that are not just memes, seem to be things that we can mix our diet with, so that we are not constantly being pulled by algorithms and that kind of thing that limit us. So that's all I would say.
Thank you. Nadia, do you have anything to share, Nadia?
I don't have anything to share. I really appreciated the reflections that were shared there. I think, similarly, I think I would add is that that's a similar thing. I think that supported my own kind of journey. To answer the question that was asked before of like being in a constant space where I know who I am, was constantly engaging with the material that shaped my understanding of myself as a Black woman of the African diaspora. So being, constantly engaging with that material and choosing to fill my own gaps in knowledge, but also allow that to be a space of affirmation of the people who came before and the people who will continue after me. Is I think the primary thing that, I would say I continue to always return to important Black feminist scholarship. There's never a last time that I've read anything that's important to me. There's certain books I've read 10 and 15 times because it's been the thing that's held me in difficult moments. I think I've returned to Audre Lorde, Poetry is Not a Luxury, so many times in the last few years when I think about the power of my own writing and my own voice and the importance of my writing. So I don't know. I think I would just say like filling in the gaps, but never remembering to return to those things is just as important for staying on the course of your own practice, your creativity, and your own sort of belief in self is an important thing that I draw on my own writing and thinking.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And remember that you too can be an activist, should you choose. Thank you to my guests. And I think we're running over time a little bit. So until next time.
Thanks for joining us for this kickoff episode of the Writing as Activism series on the Glocal Citizens podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave us a review and a thumbs up, both on the Writers Project Ghana site, on our YouTube channel, wherever you can give us a vote of confidence. We really appreciate it. And always remember that it helps other people find great content on the internet. And so until next time, bye for now.